Tonight we are talking about one show, Family Guy, and one strange idea that a thing you have watched 100 times can sit in your memory wrong. People call it the Mandela Effect, a shared false memory that whole crowds hold with total confidence. And few shows give the mind more room to slip than this one, so settle in. We are about to walk through everything people remember about Family Guy that simply is not so. If you enjoy these, consider subscribing. It helps us build a community, it rewards the work we put into each one, and it costs you nothing. Section 1. The round, cheerful fellow in the tall black hat and the neat suit, the one who stands for money and luck and getting rich. Most people ask to bring his face to mind. Place a small round eyeglass over one of his eyes, the kind held in place by the muscles of the face, the sort a fancy old gentleman might wear. He has never worn one, not on any board, not on any box, not in a single version of the game across all the years it has been sold. That little eyeglass that so many people can see so clearly was never there at all. A wrong memory held by one person is just a mistake, the kind everyone makes and shrugs off. A wrong memory held by millions of people, all the same way, all at the same time, is something stranger. And that strange thing has a name. People call it the Mandela Effect. The name comes from a woman named Fiona Broome, who spent her time studying stories of the unexplained. Sometime around 2009 to 2010, she realized she carried a clear and detailed memory of Nelson Mandela, the South African leader dying in prison back in the 1980s. She could recall the news of it, the sadness, the speeches that followed, the whole shape of the event. And when she started talking to other people about it, she found that a great many of them remembered the exact same thing in the exact same way. None of it had happened. Mandela walked out of prison alive in 1990. He went on to lead his entire country as its president from 1994 to 1999. He lived for many years after that and died in 2013, an old man, long free of any cell. A huge number of people had quietly filed away a death that never took place, complete with details they would have sworn on their lives were real. Broome put a name to that shared mistake, and the name stuck. Once you know to look for it, this kind of group mistake turns up everywhere. Think of the most famous line in the Star Wars movies. The moment the villain in the black mask reveals that he is the hero's father. Almost everyone remembers it as, "Luke, I am your father." The real line never says the name Luke at all. What the character actually says is, "No, I am your father." The version living in everyone's head is close, but it is not what was ever put on film, and it never has been. The same thing happens with the old cartoon movie about a young princess and a jealous queen. People remember the queen stepping up to her enchanted glass and saying, "Mirror, mirror on the wall." The real words are, "Magic mirror on the wall." Two tiny changes, repeated by millions, handed down for decades, treated as solid fact by people who would bet money they had it right. There are plenty more. A famous gold robot from those same Star Wars films is pictured by nearly everyone as gold from his head to his feet, yet one of his legs is actually silver. A long series of children's books about a family of bears is spelled in a way most readers get wrong, ending in the letters A-I-N, though crowds of grown adults will insist it ended in E-I-N, the way the name sounds out loud. Even the old cartoon shorts trip people up. That whole collection was named after music, spelled like the tunes you would hum, not like the word cartoons, and the real spelling still surprises people who grew up glued to them. These are not vague, foggy feelings either. People can describe the wrong version in fine detail. They can picture the eyeglass and the thin chain it hangs from. They can hear the misquoted line in the actor's exact voice. The false memory does not arrive looking like a guess. It arrives looking and feeling like a clear, ordinary, trustworthy memory, no different from a true one, which is exactly why it fools so many people so completely. Stubbornness is part of it too. Show someone the truth, and they often do not simply accept it. They push back, sure that their own version is the real one, and that the world itself must have changed, or that you are the one with it backward. The correction bounces right off, because a false memory does not feel false from the inside. It feels exactly like every true thing a person knows. People have stood in front of the actual movie line, the actual logo, the actual spelling, and still walked away half convinced that the version in their head was the genuine one and the proof in front of them was somehow the trick. What links all of these is not that people are careless or foolish. It is that memory does not work the way most of us quietly assume it does. The mind is not a camera that records a moment and plays it back the same forever. It keeps a rough sketch, a feeling, a few strong details, and lets most of the rest fall away. Then, when you reach for the memory later, it rebuilds the missing parts right there on the spot, using whatever feels about right. The rebuilt version shows up feeling whole and true, even though it was patched together a second ago out of guesses. When many people share the same gaps, they tend to fill them the same way. We grew up on the same movies, the same games, the same little logos and songs. So our minds reach for the same nearby guess and land on the same wrong answer together. A private slip turns into a public one. A whole crowd ends up certain, in perfect agreement about something that simply is not so. Something about that confidence is the real trap. Being sure feels like proof. When a memory comes back clear and detailed and steady, the mind treats that clarity as evidence that the memory is true. But clarity and truth truth are two different things. A made-up memory can feel every bit as sharp as a real one, sometimes sharper, and there is no little signal inside your head that flags the difference. So people defend the wrong answer with total honesty, never lying, never guessing on purpose, simply trusting a feeling that has quietly led them astray. Now carry that idea over to a television show. Not one line or one logo, but hundreds of episodes and thousands of small moments, a whole world people have watched on and off for more than 20 years. If a crowd can misremember a single movie line, picture what a crowd can do with an entire cartoon they have half watched on sleepy nights for most of their lives. Family Guy may be the richest example of this anywhere. The show has been everywhere for ages, playing in the background of countless evenings, quoted and clipped and shared, until it feels like part of the furniture in people's minds. And the things people are most sure they remember about it, the words in its song, the voices of its characters, the order the episodes came in, even which episodes are real, pull away from the truth again and again. Not in small, forgivable ways, in big, confident, provable ones. What lies ahead is a slow walk through those cracks, one at a time. A line that millions hear wrong before every episode. A voice that hid the truth about the person making it for more than 20 years. A beloved moment that almost everyone files in the wrong year, off by nearly a decade. A character rewritten in memory until the real beginning feels invented. And an episode that some fans swear they watched while others swear it never existed at all. Each one is a spot where what people feel certain about and what truly happened quietly come apart. Set those cases side by side and they stop looking like a list of odd little facts. They start looking like one pattern wearing different masks. A sound, a voice, a date, a character, a whole episode, each one bent in memory the same quiet way, all of it growing from the same single root. By the end, the cartoon almost stops being the point. The cartoon is just the clearest window anyone has onto something that happens in every mind all the time, about nearly everything it has ever loved. None of this, by the way, is a knock on anyone. The same thing happens to everyone, with the shows and songs and movies they grew up on. A person does not misremember something they saw once and forgot. They misremember the things they love, the things that played in the background of 1,000 ordinary nights, the things so familiar that they quietly stopped looking at them years ago. The mistakes grow in the very places where a show sank the deepest, which makes them a strange kind of proof of how much people watched and how much they cared. Few shows are built better for this than this one. A cartoon watched this casually, by this many people, in this scattered and sleepy and out of order way, is close to a perfect test of how human memory really behaves. The same slips happen with everything, with songs and movies and the small moments of ordinary life, but they usually stay hidden, private, never checked. Here, because so many people watch the same show in the same broken way, the slips line up, they become visible, they can be compared and proven, which is the only reason any of this can be caught at all. And the strangest part of all of it is how sure people are. Go back to that little man from the board game, the one in the top hat. Gather a room full of people and ask them to describe him, and watch how many of them, without a flicker of doubt, set that small round eyeglass over his eye. They can see it. Some will describe the thin chain that holds it. A few will argue with you about it, certain that you are the one who is confused, certain enough to wager money. They are looking together at a thing that has never existed, in calm and perfect detail, all agreeing, and not one of them has the faintest idea they are doing it. That is not a failure of a few careless minds. That is the ordinary, everyday machinery of memory, caught in the act. That is the whole engine of this video held in a single picture. A crowd, calm and sure of itself, all seeing the same thing that was never there. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But to understand why this one show fools so many people so badly, you have to know what happened to it. Because Family Guy did not simply go on the air and stay there. It died, and what came afterward is the reason almost no one remembers it the way it really was. Section 2. The show you think you remember. On a Sunday night in early 1999, tens of millions of Americans were already parked on their couches after the biggest football game of the year. The remote was within reach, the snacks were out, and almost nobody was going anywhere. And right into that warm, captive crowd, a brand new cartoon made its very first appearance. Back then, the half hour right after the big game was treated as the most valuable patch of ground in all of television. A network could set anything it wanted in front of that giant, sleepy, satisfied audience, and people would stay put and watch. Handing that slot to a show was a way of saying, we believe in this, we are betting real money on it. On January 31st, 1999, the slot went to a cartoon about a loud, dim father, his family, and a talking dog. Around 22 million people watched that night. The episode they saw was the very first one ever made, the one that introduced the whole family to the world for the first time. That kind of launch is the opposite of small and quiet. A show does not get the slot right after the big game by accident, and it does not get it without a network spending real attention and real cash to make it work. So the picture many people carry of a scrappy little cartoon that crept onto late-night television and slowly built a quiet following is wrong from the very start. Family Guy walked in through the largest front door television has. What came next is where the familiar story falls apart. That first year was tiny. Only 7 episodes were made, and most of them did not even air until the spring. So the show that millions had sampled after the football game mostly vanished for a couple of months, dribbled out a few more episodes, then stopped. When it came back for a second season, things had already begun to slide. The network moved it around the schedule, dropping it into worse and worse time slots, often against shows that were beating it badly. The big crowd from that first night thinned out fast, and through the next year, into 2000, the ratings kept sinking. By some accounts, the show slid, reportedly, all the way down toward the bottom of the rankings, somewhere around 114th place. The kind of fall a network does not sit with for long. A drop that steep makes a network nervous, and this one got nervous, so it pulled the plug. The show was canceled. Then, after a short while, it was brought back for a little more. Then, it was canceled again. By 2002, no new episodes were being made at all. A cartoon that had opened in front of more than 20 million people had been killed off twice in only a few years, and as far as anyone could tell at the time, it was simply over and done. Plenty of shows end exactly like that and are never heard from again. What happened to Family Guy after it died is the part almost nobody remembers right, and it is the part that explains everything else in this video. After the network gave up, the old episodes did not vanish into a vault. The rights to rerun them went to a late-night block of cartoons made for grown-ups, and something odd happened there. Out of everything playing on that block, The Dead Show became the most popular thing on it. More people were watching reruns of a canceled cartoon than were watching plenty of shows still being made and still being paid for. Across that late-night block, those reruns pulled in close to 2 million viewers a night. Consider what that actually meant. A show with no new episodes, no promotion, and no future anyone believed in was quietly beating living shows in the dead of night. People were finding it for the first time at strange hours. With no idea it had ever been canceled, no idea they were watching something the network had already given up on twice. To them, it was not a dead show at all. It was just the funny cartoon that was always on late, the one a roommate left running, the one that filled the quiet hours. They were falling in love with it completely out of order and completely out of time. Around the same time, the early seasons were packaged onto disc and sold. This was the early 2000s, when owning a box set of a show you love felt like a small treasure you could hold in your hands. The first set sold in numbers that stunned everyone, moving more than 2 million copies and standing among the best-selling television discs anyone had seen up to that point. People who had missed the show the first time, or who had only ever caught it half awake on the late-night block, were buying it, watching it on their own time, and pressing it on their friends. When total sales climbed past 3 million, the people who had buried the show twice finally sat up and paid attention. The math had become impossible to ignore. A show the network had thrown away was outselling and outdrawing the very things the network was still pouring money into. So the network did something almost unheard of. It brought a canceled cartoon back from the dead, not because of how it once did on the air, but because of how many people were buying the discs and watching the reruns. New episodes were ordered in 2004. The show that had been declared finished returned with fresh episodes on May 1st, 2005, watched that night by around 12 million people. Family Guy is widely described as the first show ever revived mostly on the strength of its disc sales. That is a genuine oddity. Other shows have come back before, but rarely like this, pulled out of the grave by a crowd that kept showing up long after the network had walked it away. When it returned, the show leaned right into the joke of its own near death. The episode chosen to bring it back had the father reel off a string of other shows that would all have to fail and get canceled before his show could ever come back on the air. The writers were winking at their own funeral, fully aware that the only reason they were back was a strange second life that almost nothing else had ever managed. They had cheated death, and they knew it, and they said so out loud the moment they returned. For the people watching, though, none of that order was visible. A fan tuning in years later was not living through a comeback. They were just watching a cartoon that had always seemed to be there, with no sense of a death behind it or a rescue that saved it. The triumph of the comeback, one of the strangest survival stories television has, was invisible to the very audience it created. They inherited the result without ever seeing the struggle, which is its own quiet way of getting a show's whole history wrong. Here is the piece that matters most, the reason this whole strange history sits at the front of everything else. The Family Guy that most people carry in their heads was never watched the way it actually unfolded. The huge launch, the fast collapse, the 2 cancellations, the long, quiet years when the show was simply gone, the slow comeback through late-night reruns and stacks of discs. Hardly anyone lived through that in order, week by week, the way it really happened. Think about how people actually met this show. Someone caught a rerun at 1 in the morning, half awake, channel surfing with the lights off. Someone borrowed a friend's box set and watched 20 episodes in a single lazy weekend. Someone saw a clip passed around online years after it first aired, with no idea at all when it was made. Younger fans found it through short videos on their phones, with no sense of the order of anything. No sense of which season came first or which moment came last. When a person meets a show in scattered pieces like that, with no calendar and no map, their memory of it gets built out of those scattered pieces. The mind, which hates a messy and shapeless pile, quietly tidies it into a smooth and confident version that feels complete and is mostly invented. Even though it was stitched together together from fragments that arrived in the wrong order. That tidy, invented version is what people are reaching for when they swear they know how the show began, or how a character has always sounded, or what a certain line has always said. Their confidence is real. The thing underneath it was assembled after the fact, and the pieces did not arrive evenly either. Some episodes were reran 100 times while others were barely seen at all. Some clips spread everywhere while whole stretches of the show sat untouched. So the version of the show in a person's head is not just out of order. It is lopsided, built mostly from the handful of bits that traveled the most, with the rest filled in by guesswork and the general feeling of the thing. A few loud moments stand in for the whole, and the mind treats that thin, patchy sample as if it were the complete and faithful record. That is the soil every strange case in this video grows out of. A show that died and came back. A show met mostly in reruns and on discs and in clips instead of in order. A whole audience whose sense of the show was assembled later, out of order, often while drifting off toward sleep. Under conditions like that, false memories are not some rare accident. They are almost guaranteed. The wonder is not that people remember this show wrong. The wonder is how deeply and how confidently they do it, right down to details they would bet money on. Sit with the shape of it for a moment. A cartoon opens in front of more than 20 million people, the brightest possible start, then collapses, gets thrown away again, and lies there as a dead show for years. And then a crowd that mostly was not even watching the first time digs it up, half by accident, on late nights and on discs, and loves it so much that the network has to bring it back to life. The version of the show that almost everyone holds dear is the second one, the one that came after the grave. The first life, the real beginning, is the part that got buried, and a buried beginning is the easiest thing in the world to remember wrong. What the death and the comeback of Family Guy demonstrate about why the show is misremembered is that almost no one met it in the order it truly happened, so the mind was left to build its picture of the show out of scattered, dateless pieces. And a picture built that way can never quite be trusted, no matter how certain it feels. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously, and the misremembering does not begin somewhere deep in a forgotten episode. It begins at the very front of every episode ever made, in two small words at the end of a song. Section 3. The two words nobody hears right. Every episode opens the same way, before a single joke lands, before the story even gets going. There is a short song sung in the bright and cheerful style of an old family show from many decades back, the kind with a piano leading the way and a room full of happy voices. The mother starts it, singing about how everything on television these days seems to be rude and violent. The father picks it up, asking where all the good old-fashioned values went. Then the whole family swings into the sunny part, about how lucky they are to have a Family Guy. And right at the very end, the baby gets the final words before everyone shouts the title together. The words the baby sings are laugh and cry. That is the whole point of the line. The family has been singing about warm, gentle, old-fashioned feelings, the soft and sweet things a good show used to give people, and the baby caps it off by naming two of the most basic feelings there are. Laughing and crying. The tune is meant to be wholesome from the first note to the last, a loving little wink at the cheery family songs of the past. He sings it fast though, in a high, clip fancy voice, and the line goes by in a blink. The soft sound at the front of the first word gets swallowed, and the whole phrase rushes past before the ear can really lock onto it. Played at normal speed, with everyone singing over the top and the music swelling underneath, that little phrase turns into a smear of sound the brain has to guess at, and a huge number of people hearing it for the first time guess wrong. What they hear is not laugh and cry. What they hear is a word that sounds like a curse, dropped right into the middle of this sweet old family song. They hear the baby slip something rude into a tune that is supposed to be perfectly innocent, and once that version locks into a person's head, it locks in hard. The line stops sounding like two gentle words and starts sounding like a tiny act of mischief hidden in plain sight. A baby cursing on a family show before the episode has even begun. A few things push the ear in that wrong direction all at once. The soft sound at the start of the real word is easy to lose when the line is sung quickly. The baby's proper way of speaking blurs the edges of the words even more, and the show had built a loud reputation as rude, daring, and willing to sneak in things it probably should not. So a hidden curse in the theme song did not feel like a stretch to people. It felt completely in character. The mind heard something fuzzy, reached for the version that matched what it already believed about the show, and grabbed the rude one. From that moment on, that was simply what the song said, as far as that person was concerned. Here is the part that lifts this out of the world of ordinary mix-ups and makes it solid and provable. The man who created the show, who wrote the words to that song along with one of his early writing partners, and who voices the baby singing the line, knew that a wave of people were hearing his gentle phrase as a curse. The music came from a composer named Walter Murphy, and the words from the show's creator and a writer named David Zuckerman. And the mishearing bothered the creator enough that he went back and recorded the line again, early in the show's life, working to push that swallowed soft sound forward so more people would catch the real word. He has said, plainly and more than once, that it was always laugh and cry. Guy. A person does not usually go back and re-record a tiny piece of a theme song over a simple mishearing, unless that mishearing has spread far and wide. The re-recording itself is the proof of how big this had grown. Listen to how the song is built, and the trap makes even more sense. The whole thing is dressed up to sound like the cheerful family tunes of half a century ago, the kind that opened gentle old sitcoms about happy households. There is the bright piano, the chorus of voices all singing together, the swelling, sunny feeling of it. The baby's last line has to thread through all of that, sung high and quick and clipped, riding over a wall of other sound. So the one moment in the song where a single soft consonant carries the whole meaning is also the moment most crowded with music and competing voices. The design that makes the song charming is the same design that hides its last two words, which is why even a careful listener can miss them, and why pushing that sound forward took a deliberate second take in the studio. The mishearing was never unreasonable either, which is part of why it spread so well. This is a show that genuinely did hide rude jokes in clever places, that built its whole name on slipping past what a cartoon was supposed to get away with. So when the ear caught something fuzzy at the end of the opening song, the guess it reached for, that the baby had snuck in a curse, fit everything people already believed about the show. The wrong answer was not a wild leap. It was the most fitting answer available, which made it feel less like a guess and more like catching the show in the act. People were not just mishearing a word, they were hearing the version of the show they expected to hear. Years into the show's run, the writers stopped fighting the mix-up and started joking about it instead. In an episode called Friends of Peter G., which aired on February 13, 2011, a very drunk father waves the baby off and asks aloud whether there is even any real difference between the two versions of the line, the gentle one and the rude-sounding one. It is a small moment, easy to miss, and it only fully lands for people who already know about the long-running argument. The writers were telling everyone right inside the show that they were aware of it. They knew people had been hearing it wrong for years, and they found it funny enough to put on screen. That little joke only works because the writers trusted that a real part of the audience would get it, which means they knew the mishearing was huge. You do not build a gag around a misunderstanding unless a great many people share it. The show was not correcting the crowd anymore. It was playing with them, treating the wrong version as a thing everyone already carried, a private joke between the writers and a fan base that had been arguing about two words for years. The mistake had become so common that the show could lean on it as shared knowledge and trust the laugh to land. Picture the joke the song is actually trying to tell, and you can see why the rude version breaks it. The whole gag is that this is a sweet, square, old-fashioned family song, the kind that drips with warmth and good values. The humor lives in how innocent it pretends to be. A real curse word dropped into the middle of that would wreck the joke completely, because the joke depends on the song staying clean. The gentle words are the entire point, so the version a crowd swears it hears is not just wrong, it would actually ruin the thing it is attached to. People did not hear a curse because the song put one there. They heard a curse because they handed the song the reputation of the show wrapped around, and the mind delivered back the version that matched what it expected. Sit with how odd the whole standoff is. A song that plays before every episode, that the same people have heard more times than they could ever count, and yet a question with one plain, provable answer turns into a fight people will not let go of. You can show someone the gentle words written out. You can play the cleaned up tape. You can point to the creator saying it himself. And a person who locked onto the curse years ago will often just shrug and keep right on hearing the curse because the sound their mind made the first time is louder than any fact you can hand them. The proof loses to the memory every time on a matter that should not even be in doubt. Once a person has locked onto the rude version, getting back to the real one is almost impossible. And that is what makes this so sticky. The brain grabs the first thing it decided a sound meant, and after that, it keeps hearing that same thing every single time. Even when the gentle version is right there, even when someone points out the truth, the mind does not gently update. It digs in. So the song plays, the baby sings two soft words, and a person who locked onto the curse years ago keeps right on hearing the curse, fully certain, episode after episode, for decades. Arguments over this have run for more than 20 years, with people on both sides sure they are right and sure the other side simply has bad ears. The reason this one matters so much is that it should be impossible to get wrong. The history of the show is buried in old schedules and faded news that hardly anyone ever reads, so it makes sense that it got muddled. The opening song hides nowhere. It plays out loud, front and center, on purpose, every single time. The same people have heard it hundreds, even thousands of times. And a massive crowd still hears the wrong words, defends the wrong version with real heat, and would put money on a thing the creator personally tried to correct and then openly laughed about inside his own show. None of this is strange when you remember how the show was actually met. A song heard at 1 in the morning during a rerun, or playing softly under a long disc marathon, or buzzing out of a phone speaker on a short clip, is a song only half listened to. Half listening is exactly the state in which the ear guesses and the mind fills the gap with whatever feels right. The same fog that hid the cancellations hid the difference between two simple words. What the fight over two small words demonstrates about being familiar with something is that hearing a thing 1,000 times offers no protection at all, because each time, the ear is still quietly guessing at the blurry parts, and the version it settled on long ago is the one it keeps handing back as the truth. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. If a sound you have heard 1,000 times can sit wrong in your head, then a voice can too. And one of the most familiar voices in the whole town hid a secret about the person behind it for more than 20 years. Section 4. The man behind Cleveland. Cleveland Brown lives next door to the main family and counts as one of the father's closest friends. He is calm, kind, and slow to anger. The gentle one in a group of loud and reckless men. The soft-spoken neighbor who takes his time with every word. A big part of what makes him feel so warm and so real is the sound of him. That easy, unhurried, soothing way of talking that fans would know anywhere. For more than 20 years, that voice rolled out of him in the same steady tone, episode after episode, until it felt like one of the most fixed and natural things in the whole show. Here is what almost nobody knew while they were listening. That gentle voice came from a performer named Mike Henry, and Mike Henry is white. From the show's earliest days all the way to 2020, a white actor gave that black character his voice, his timing, and his whole soft personality. Most fans never knew this. Most never even thought to ask. The voice was so smooth and so right that the question of who was actually making it simply never came up. Henry was not just a hired voice working on the side, he was one of the core people who built the show from the ground up, working as a writer and a producer, helping shape the jokes and the stories from the start. So the neighbor everyone loved was, in a real way, his own creation, written and voiced and shaped by the same hands across all those years. And like most people in cartoons, he did not stop at one part. He voiced several other characters around the town too. The way nearly everyone on these shows juggles a whole pile of roles, one performer standing in for many. Cleveland was simply his biggest and best loved one. The character grew popular enough that he was eventually given his own separate series, which ran for 4 seasons, and Henry carried the voice over to that show as well. The bond between the performer and the part was about as deep and as long as these things ever get. In the summer of 2020, during a wide national conversation in the United States about race and fairness, Henry made an announcement. He was stepping down from voicing Cleveland. His reasoning was simple and direct. On June 26, 2020, he said that a character of color should be played by a performer of color, and so he felt the right thing to do was hand the part over. After more than 20 years of being that voice, he chose to walk away from the role on purpose. Henry was not alone in making that kind of choice. Around the same stretch, several other white performers on other cartoons stepped away from voicing characters of color, almost all at once, as part of a wider change in how shows were thinking about who should play whom. On one cartoon, a white actress gave up a mixed background character. On another show, a different white actress did the same. A long-running cartoon famous for a yellow family reworked its own casting so that its non-white characters would be voiced by performers of color. Henry's move was one piece of a larger shift moving across television in the same short window, a string of beloved voices changing hands in a matter of weeks. What stood out about Henry's choice was that the decision was his own, and he made it out loud. He did not wait to be pushed. He looked at a character he had voiced and helped build for most of his career, a character people genuinely loved, and decided on his own that the role should pass to someone else. For a performer, walking away from your most famous creation is no small thing. It is the kind of part an actor can spend a whole life hoping to find, and he chose to set it down. The choice was quiet and plain, with no drama around it, just a person deciding what felt right and saying so. About 3 months later, the show named his replacement, and the choice came from an unexpected place. On September 25, 2020, a performer named Arif Zahir was announced as the new voice of Cleveland, the first black actor ever to play the part. Zahir was no stranger to the character. He had built a large online following partly on how perfectly he could copy Cleveland's voice, posting videos of the character doing all sorts of silly modern things. His version was so close and so good that, almost the moment Henry announced he was leaving, Zahir was a natural name to step in. A fan who had spent years studying that gentle voice ended up becoming its official keeper. Listen to what that voice actually does, and you can hear why the swap mattered so much. The performance is slow and warm and a little weary. Every word given room to breathe. Never rush, never sharp. It is a voice built to calm a scene down rather than rev it up. The soft center in a town full of loud men. And because the same person also helped write the character, the voice and the personality grew together from the inside, one shaping the other across 2 whole shows. Stepping into that was no small task. Whoever took over would be filling one of the most familiar sounds on television and trying to make it his own without breaking the spell. Zahir could do it only because he had already spent years taking that voice apart and rebuilding it for fun, in front of millions of people online, long before anyone offered him the job. Think about how rare that kind of run is. Most cartoon voices change hands quietly over the years, or the character fades, or the show ends. Cleveland kept the same voice across 2 entire shows, and more than 2 decades, never wavering, never never aging, always landing in that same gentle place. To the audience, the voice was not a performance at all. It had become a fixed feature of the world, as steady and unquestioned as the color of the sky. Nobody asks who decides the sky is blue. Nobody asked who was making Cleveland sound like Cleveland. The steadiness itself made the performer invisible. Now sit for a moment with what made this so hard for people to take in. A cartoon never shows you the person doing the talking. A live actor stands in front of a camera, and the face and the voice arrive together, locked into one obvious truth you can see with your own eyes. A cartoon hides the performer completely. You hear a voice with no real face attached to it, and the mind, which cannot stand an empty space, quietly fills it. It builds a picture of who must be behind the sound, a guess stitched together from the voice, the character, and 100 small assumptions. That invented picture feels solid and certain, even though it rests on nothing but a hunch. A person can listen to a voice hundreds of times across years of their life and still carry a completely wrong idea of the human making it. There is no clue in the sound itself, no way to check, nothing there to correct the guess. So the guess just hardens into a kind of private fact, repeated and reinforced every time the character speaks, right up until the day someone reveals the truth and the whole picture has to come down and be built again from scratch. With Cleveland, a whole audience built a picture of the man behind the voice, and for an enormous number of them, that picture was nothing like the real person at all. The drawing helps hide the swap, too. A cartoon character looks exactly the same in every episode, the first one and the 500th. Same shape, same clothes, same face. So when the voice underneath finally changed hands, there was no new face to signal it, nothing on screen to say that something was different now. The picture stayed locked in place while the person behind the sound walked away. For an audience used to reading change through what they can see, a change they could only hear was easy to slide right past, especially for anyone catching the show in scattered pieces with no sense of before and after. Tell a longtime fan who made that voice, and the reaction is often flat disbelief. People who have heard Cleveland for years struggle to accept that a white man made that sound, because the voice felt so completely tied to the character that no other picture had ever formed in their heads. The certainty is real and strong, right up until the moment they hear the proof. The mind had fused the character and the voice and an imagined face into one solid thing, and it guarded that single thing against the plain facts, because giving it up means admitting that something heard so many times was carried around wrong the whole time. The feeling that follows the reveal is a strange one. It is not quite betrayal, since nobody was really lied to. It is closer to a small dizzy drop, the feeling of learning that a thing you took as simple and settled was never simple at all. A voice you trusted, a face you had quietly invented to go with it, a whole little certainty you did not even know you were holding, all of it rearranged in a second. And then, often, the mind does the most human thing of all. It smooths the new fact over, files it away, and goes right back to hearing Cleveland the way it always did. There is one more twist worth sitting with. The change to Cleveland was loud. It was announced in public, tied to a major national moment, and written about widely, the kind of news that was genuinely hard to miss when it happened. And still, plenty of fans never registered it, and still carry the old voice in their heads as the only Cleveland there has ever been. The reason is the same one running underneath this whole show. People meet Cleveland the way they meet everything else here, through scattered reruns and random clips with no calendar attached. Old episodes and new ones blur together with no sense of which came first. So the two voices melt into one in memory, and even a very public change quietly slips back into the fog. After more than 20 years, Mike Henry set down a character he had helped invent, voiced across 2 shows, and carried through hundreds of episodes, and he walked away from him on purpose. A gentle neighbor that millions of people felt they knew, made all that time by a man almost none of them had ever once pictured, handed at last to someone new. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case is not about a voice or a sound, it is about time. There is a moment so beloved that people are certain it comes from the early days, the classic golden stretch they treasure most. The truth sits almost a decade later than anyone would ever guess. Section 5. The song that showed up late. The father in this show has a habit of falling head over heels for the dumbest possible things. When something silly grabs him, he does not enjoy it in any normal way. He drowns in it, he repeats it, plays it, lives it, and pushes it on everyone around him until the people he loves are ready to scream. And one of the most famous times that ever happened starts in a little diner where he hears an old song coming out of a jukebox and gets completely hooked. That song does almost nothing except repeat over and over that the bird is the word. There is barely anything to it. A goofy, simple tune with a chorus that just keeps insisting on this one nonsense idea about a bird, and the father becomes totally consumed by it. He plays it constantly, sings it everywhere, blasts it until the whole family is losing their minds. The comedy comes from how little the song offers and how completely he gives himself over to until the joke becomes the sheer, punishing repetition of a tune that has no business being anyone's entire personality. All of this comes from an episode called I Dream of Jesus, and the date is the heart of this whole section, so it is worth letting it sit for a second. That episode aired aired on October 5, 2008. It landed in the show's 7th season, years after the cancellations and the long quiet stretch and the surprising comeback. This beloved, endlessly repeated bit, the one so many people treasure as pure classic Family Guy, arrived in 2008. The song at the center of it is real, and it is genuinely ancient. A band called the Trashmen put it out back in November 1963, and it climbed to number 4 on the charts in early 1964, more than 40 years before the episode that made it famous to a brand new crowd. So the tune the father falls in love with was already a dusty oldie by the time the show ever touched it. A relic from a different age of music, pulled back into the light for a joke. Inside that same episode, a second strange thing is going on alongside the obsession. The father stumbles across a man he becomes convinced is Jesus, working behind the counter at a record store, and sets out to tell the whole world about it. Meanwhile, the dog and the baby get so sick of the bird song that they take matters into their own hands and try to wipe it out completely, to make sure no one ever has to hear it again. The episode is stuffed with all of this at once, but the part that lived on, the part that outlasted everything else in it, was the father and that one maddening little song. Ask almost any fan when this is from, and the answer comes back wrong, with total confidence. People place it early. They file it in the show's first few years, the treasured old stretch that fans hold up as the show at its best. It feels like vintage Family Guy, like a piece of the foundation, like something from the very beginning. The certainty is strong, and the truth, the fall of 2008, sits almost a decade past where most people would ever put it. Several things shove the memory earlier, and they stack on top of one another until the wrong date feels obvious. The song being genuinely old does quiet, sneaky work on the mind. It sounds old. It carries the crackle and the feel of another time, a tune your grandparents might have danced to, and a brain hearing something that feels that old tends to tag the whole package as old, the cartoon bit included. The age of the song bleeds onto the age of the memory. People half remember an old-sounding song stuck to a cartoon joke, and the old feeling spreads until the joke itself gets stamped as early and classic. Play the bit back and you can feel the second trick at work. The show treats this nonsense song with a completely straight face, building whole stretches of the episode around nothing but the father playing it again and again. The animation does not wink at you. The joke is allowed to run long, past the point of reason, until the repetition itself becomes the gag. That kind of patient, committed silliness is exactly what people think of when they picture the show in its early prime. The bit feels like the early years because it leans on the same trick the early years leaned on, and the mind quietly takes that resemblance as a date stamp. There is something else that Straight Face does. By refusing to rush the joke, the show makes the bit feel timeless, unstuck from any particular year. A quick gag dates itself. A long, patient, committed piece of silliness feels like it could have come from anywhere in the show's life. So the bird song floats free, attached to no clear moment, and a floating memory drifts toward wherever it feels like it belongs. For most people, that is the early years, because that is when they imagine the show was at its loosest and its boldest. The behavior points the memory backward too. A grown man drowning in a childish obsession, repeating a dumb thing until everyone around him cracks, is about as classic as this father gets. That exact flavor of comedy is the energy people most tie to the early years of the show, the stuff they think of as the original recipe. So when the mind meets a bit built on that energy, it sorts the bit in with the early years out of pure instinct, because that is where that kind of joke feels like it belongs. Then there is how the bit spread. It became one of the show's first truly massive moments online, back when passing little clips around the web was still a fresh and growing thing. It has been floating around for a very long time now, replayed and reposted and quoted for years on end. A thing that has been everywhere for that long starts to feel like it has been around forever, and the feeling of forever reads in the mind as from the beginning. The longer a clip lives loose in the world, the older its true source starts to feel, even when the two have nothing to do with each other. The clip also outran its own source. People shared the bird bit who had never seen the episode it came from, who had no idea there was a man convinced he had met Jesus at a record store in the same half hour. The joke broke loose from its home and traveled on its own, a single shining fragment with no episode around it and no date attached. And a fragment like that gets dated entirely by feel, because there is nothing else to date it by. Stripped of the episode, stripped of the season, stripped of any calendar, the bit arrived in most people's lives, already cut loose from time, waiting to be filed wherever the feeling pointed. And underneath all of that sits the bent timeline from earlier. A 7th season sounds early because the number is low, and a low number naturally seems to mean a young show. That would be true for almost any normal series. It is dead wrong for this one. The original run only reached a few seasons before the network killed it off, and everything after that belongs to the comeback. The seasons did not roll out in one smooth, steady line. They came in 2 separate chunks with a long death sitting in the middle, and the second chunk dwarfs the first. So a bit from the 7th season is not from the early days in any real sense. It comes from well into the second life of a show that had already died and clawed its way back. Anyone who does not know that history, which is nearly everyone, reads the low number as early and files the bird song decades too soon. Memory is famously bad at dating things in the first place, and a bent timeline only makes it worse. The mind holds on to how something felt with an iron grip and lets go of when it happened almost at once. People can recall a moment in vivid detail, every sound and feeling intact, and still have no real idea what year it landed in. In the moment of laughing at a man and a silly bird song, nobody is writing down the date. The joke matters, the year does not. So the year never really gets saved, and later, when someone tries to recall it, there is no stored answer to pull up. The mind does the only thing it can. It guesses, using feel as its only guide, and the feel says old, classic, early. Now layer the bent timeline on top of that ordinary fuzziness, and the error becomes almost guaranteed. A normal show gives the mind a ladder. The first season at the bottom, the latest one at the top, each rung right where you would expect it. A show that died and came back kicks the ladder over. The early years are short, the later years are long, and the gap in the middle scrambles any sense of where a low season number actually falls. So the one tool people lean on to data memory, the season number, quietly points them in exactly the wrong direction. Picture the house while it is happening. The song blasting from another room for the 10th time, the 11th, the 20th, the father grinning, lost in it, utterly delighted. The rest of the family worn down to nothing, begging him to stop, while he keeps right on playing the one dumb tune as if it were the greatest thing ever recorded. It is a small, funny, completely ordinary moment of a man loving something stupid too much. And it is the kind of moment that burns itself into memory exactly because it is so silly and so vivid, while the one detail nobody bothers to keep, the year it actually happened, slips away without a sound. And notice that the show itself liked the bit enough to bring it back in later episodes, which only thickened the fog. A joke that returns more than once stops feeling pinned to a single moment. It becomes a recurring thing, a piece of the show's furniture, and furniture has no birthday. Each time the song came back, it loosened a little more from the night it first aired, until the question of when it began stopped feeling like it even had an answer. A running gag, by its nature, erases its own start date, and this one erased its start date by almost a decade. What the bird song demonstrates about how memory keeps time is that the mind clings to how a moment felt and quietly throws away when it happened, then fills that empty blank with a guess shaped entirely by the feeling, and a 2008 joke that feels old and classic gets dragged back into years it never once touched. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next change is the largest of all, and it sits on the smallest member of the family. The baby everyone thinks of as a harmless, clever little oddball began as something genuinely dark, and most fans flatly refuse to believe it. Section 6, the baby who wanted more than mischief. In one of the show's earliest episodes, a baby sits in his high chair, looks up from his tray, and calmly lays out his plans for the day. Not a nap, not a snack. He wants to be rid of his mother, and once that is handled, he wants to take over the world. He says it the way another child might ask for more juice, in a crisp, fancy little accent, completely sure of himself. That baby is Stewie, and at the start of the show, he was not a lovable little weirdo. He was the villain. Back then, the writing made it plain. Stewie had two clear goals, and the show stated them again and again. The first was getting rid of his mother, who he had decided was the great enemy standing in his way. The second was bending the whole world to his will. He built strange machines in his bedroom, hatched plots, and gave long, hammy speeches about his coming victory, the kind a movie bad guy gives right before everything falls apart. For a real stretch of the early show, a thread of genuine menace ran under the comedy, and it ran straight through the baby. And it was not just talk. In those first seasons, the baby actually acted on it. He aimed weapons at his mother. He schemed to get her out of the picture so his plans could move forward. He treated her as the single obstacle between himself and everything he wanted. None of it ever worked, because the world of the show never let a baby truly win, and that failure was part of the joke too. But the intent was real, stated and repeated, an open running thread rather than a one-time gag. The show kept circling back to it, episode after episode, until it was simply part of who the character was. He even put the goal into his own chilly little words once, brushing the whole thing off as no big deal. It was not that he wanted to kill his mother, he explained. He simply wanted her to no longer be alive. He said it lightly, almost politely, as if correcting a small misunderstanding, rather than describing something dark. That cool, matter-of-fact delivery was the entire joke. A tiny child in footy pajamas, talking like a cold, old mastermind, completely calm about the most extreme idea in the room. None of this was hidden or subtle. The villainy was the loud, obvious center of the character, not a quiet undertone you had to squint to catch. His earliest moments leaned on it. His first catchphrases leaned on it. Anyone watching those opening seasons could not have missed it, because the show put it right up front and built whole plots around it. The dark baby was not a rumor or a buried scene. He was the main idea, out in the open, for everyone to see. Picture the contrast the show was playing with. A baby is the most harmless thing imaginable, all soft edges and big eyes, something the whole world is built to protect. And the early show handed that creature the cold heart and grand schemes of a movie mastermind, then let the two ideas grind against each other for laughs. The threat was never real, because a baby cannot truly menace anyone, and that safety is what let the jokes stay stay funny instead of grim. But the show fully committed to the pose, treating the tiny villain as if he genuinely might pull it off, playing every scheme with a straight face. Watch one of those early stretches now and the flavor is unmistakable. Everything about how he was drawn and voiced pushed the villain idea. The fancy clipped accent that sounds nothing like the rest of his family, the way the show let him break off and speak right to the audience like a stage villain sharing his scheme. The ray guns and time machines built with deadly seriousness in a baby's bedroom. He was even given the looming, top-heavy shape of a cartoon mastermind, all forehead and plotting. The comedy ran on treating a helpless infant as a real threat, and the show committed to that bit completely, never winking, never softening the menace for the sake of being cute. Over the next couple of seasons, all of that began to drain away. The plots against his mother grew rarer and softer. The talk of ruling the world faded into the background. The strange machines started getting used for sillier and sillier things. Grand inventions aimed at nothing much at all. The villain slowly turned into an oddball. By the time the show settled into its long life, Stewie was a quirky, clever, often sweet little character who went on goofy adventures with the family dog. The menace was simply gone, quietly retired while nobody was watching. There was a plain reason for the drift. A villain is a hard thing to keep at the center of a comedy for years on end. A character who truly wants the worst for the people around him can only carry so many episodes before the joke wears thin or turns sour. An oddball, by contrast, can do anything. He can scheme one week and have a tender moment the next, go on a silly adventure, crack wise, soften and harden as the story needs. So the show quietly traded a character with one dark note for a character with a whole keyboard, and the trade paid off. The gentler Stewie could last, and he did, for decades. On a commentary track recorded for the early seasons, the man who made the show talked about that shift openly. He described the original Stewie as something close to a classic movie villain, a baby built to scheme and threaten, and admitted the character had drifted a long way from there into something gentler and more playful. The people making the show knew exactly what they had changed. They had taken a tiny villain and slowly, on purpose, sanded him down into a fan favorite, swapping the threat for charm a little at a time until the original was hard to even picture. What is strange about the change is how invisible it became. The look never changed. Stewie has the same odd-shaped head, the same football silhouette, the same outfit, the same fancy little voice he had on day one. So the part of him you can see and hear stayed frozen in place, while the part you cannot, the personality underneath, was rewritten completely. And memory clings hardest to the things it can see and hear. The picture stayed the same, so people assumed the person inside the picture stayed the same too, all the way back to the beginning. Think about how rarely anything on screen tells you a personality has shifted. A real actor can age, grow tired, change in 100 small ways that quietly mark the passing of time. A cartoon offers none of that. The drawing is a promise that nothing has changed, repeated in every single frame. So when the writing underneath a drawing moves, slowly, across years, the picture keeps insisting that it has not. The eye trusts the picture never budges, and the shift slips past unmarked, leaving people sure the character was always exactly what he is now. A baby that looks identical across more than 20 years is a near-perfect trap for the memory. Nothing on the surface ever flags that something underneath has moved. There is no fresh design to mark the before and the after. No clear visual line in the sand. So the gentle, beloved Stewie, who fills the long middle and later years, quietly spreads backward in people's minds. Coding the early seasons too, painting over the villain who actually stood there. The mind takes the version it knows best and treats it as the version that was always true. Come to the show through its later, gentler years, which is how most people did, and the early villain is not just forgotten, it is rejected. Show a newer fan a clip of baby Stewie coldly plotting against his own mother, and the reaction is often flat disbelief. That cannot be right. That is not him. He would never. The cuddly version is so deeply set that the original feels like a fake, like someone made it up or stitched it together as a joke. People will argue that the show was always sweet about him, that he was always just a funny little genius, that the dark stuff never really happened. They are looking at the real beginning and calling it false. Part of why the denial runs so deep is the order people met him in. Most fans came aboard during the long, gentle years and the comeback that followed, when the villain was already long retired. For them, there was never a dark Stewie to forget, because they never saw one in the first place. They met the sweet version first, learned to love it, and built their whole idea of the character around it. So the early footage does not read as an older version of someone they know. It reads as a counterfeit, a wrong note, a thing that does not fit the person they are certain they have always known. Listen to how calmly that early baby lays it all out, and you can feel why it sticks in the throat of anyone who only knows the soft version. There is no anger in it, no tantrum, no childish heat. There is just a small, prim voice describing the end of his mother and the conquest of the world in the same flat tone he might use to complain about the temperature of his bottle. It is funny and unsettling at the same time, exactly as it was built to be. And it sits so far from the warm, goofy character people grew to love that their minds simply refused to file the two as the same person, even though they always were. There is a strange kind of proof hidden in how hard people resist this one. You do not get worked up defending a character you barely barely watched. The fierceness of the denial, the certainty that the villain never existed, is a measure of how much these fans loved the gentle version. How many hours they spent with him, how deeply he settled into their sense of the show. The stronger the bond, the more completely the early version got painted over, because the mind guards the picture it treasures. So the people most sure that baby Stewie was always sweet are often the very people who watched him the most. Their certainty is not ignorance. It is affection, doing to memory exactly what affection does. Same baby, same odd-shaped head, same prim little voice, same outfit he has worn since the very first scene, once he sat in that high chair calmly planning to be rid of his mother and rule the world. And now a whole audience remembers him as nothing but a harmless little oddball, certain that is all he ever was. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case is the strangest one yet, because it is not about a thing people remember wrong. It is about a thing many people were never allowed to see at all. A finished episode, made and animated and ready, and then locked away. Section 7. The episode that splits the room. In the summer of 2009, at a large gathering of fans, the people behind the show stood in front of a crowd and shared an odd piece of news. One of their finished episodes, a whole completed half hour, was never going to air on American television. It was done. It was animated, it had been built as a season finale, and the network had decided that no one in the country would see it on the air. The episode is called Partial Terms of Endearment, and the trouble was its subject. In the story, the mother of the family agrees to carry a baby for an old college friend who cannot have one of her own. She becomes a surrogate, pregnant on behalf of another couple, doing a generous and complicated thing for people she cares about. Then, partway through, the couple who were meant to raise the child are killed in a sudden car crash, and the mother is left holding an enormous, painful decision about whether to continue the pregnancy at all. What made it land was that the show did not treat any of it as a throwaway. The premise asked the family to sit with real weight, a kind gesture turned into a crisis, a choice with no easy answer. For a series known mostly for quick jokes and chaos, going to that kind of place was a swing, and people who have seen it tend to agree the swing connected. So the episode that got buried was not some careless mess the network was right to be embarrassed by. By most accounts, it was one of the more thoughtful things the show ever attempted, which only makes its burial stranger. That is heavy ground for any show, and especially for a loud cartoon comedy. The subject sits at the center of one of the most heated arguments in the whole country, the kind of topic that splits rooms and families and has done so for decades. The network looked at all of that and decided it was not worth the fight. The head of the network later explained the call in plain terms. The subject was simply too sensitive, too likely to cause trouble, even though, by his own account, the episode itself handled the material carefully and well. The episode was not buried because it was bad. It was buried because of what it was about. So a finished piece of the show, fully drawn and scored and ready to go, was set on a shelf in the dark. The story was complete. The voices were recorded. Every frame existed. And the one thing it never got was the thing every other episode got automatically: a night on the air in its own country. For American viewers, the episode became a kind of ghost, a real thing that officially never happened. Present and absent at the same time. Stop and notice how rare and strange that is. Shows abandon ideas all the time. Scripts get rewritten, jokes get cut, rough versions get tossed, long before anyone draws a single frame. What almost never happens is a network paying for a whole episode, letting it be finished to the last detail, and then refusing to air it, not because the work failed, but because the topic frightened them. The money was spent, the thing was made, and still it was kept in the dark, which tells you how nervous the subject made the people in charge. For the people who made it, that decision had to sting in a particular way. They had taken a real creative risk, handled a hard subject with care, finished the whole thing, and then watched it get shelved not for being bad, but for being brave. A joke that bombs gets cut and forgotten. A careful piece of work locked away because it might upset someone is a different kind of loss. The episode existed, complete and finished, and the one country it was made for was the single place it could not be shown. It did not vanish completely though, and this is where the memories start to split. The episode aired in another country first. On June 20th, 2010, it played on television in the United Kingdom, watched in just under 1 million homes, a perfectly ordinary broadcast on a perfectly ordinary night. People over there simply saw it, the way they saw any other episode. Then, that same year, it arrived in the United States the only way the network would allow, tucked onto a home video disc you could buy in September. Footage from it even surfaced briefly on American television later, folded into a special looking back at the show. But the full episode never once aired on the network at home. Picture what that does to a fan base spread across the world. In one country, the episode is just a normal part of the run, watched on a normal night, remembered like any other. In another, it is a forbidden thing, available only if you went looking for it on a disc. Some fans bought that disc and watched it and remember it clearly. Others heard about it and assumed they had seen it. Others never encountered it at all and are certain it does not exist. All of these people are partly right, which is exactly the problem. The way it reached America made all of this worse. A disc you had to know about, search for, and buy is not how anyone normally meets an episode of a show. Most people watch whatever is continues on in the flow of everything else. An episode you can only get by going out of your way becomes invisible to the casual fan and a small treasure to the devoted one. So the people who saw it were a narrow, self-selected slice, while everyone else was left with rumor, a vague sense that some banned episode was out there somewhere, with no way to be sure they had ever actually watched it. So you end up with a genuine split, an argument with no clean answer. One person swears they watched the surrogate story years ago and can describe it scene by scene. Another swears, just as honestly, that there is no such episode, that the show never made it, that the first person is thinking of something else entirely. Both feel certain, both are sure the other is confused, and both are partly correct, because the episode lived two completely different lives at the same moment, one out in the open and one in the dark, and a person's memory of it depends entirely on which life they happen to brush against. The way it was made deepens the strangeness. This was not a rough idea or a script that got abandoned. It was finished to the same standard as everything else. A full episode built to close out a season, carrying the same look and rhythm and voices as the rest of the show. Everything about it says ordinary episode. Only one fact says otherwise: the quiet decision, made in an office, that it would never touch the air at home. A normal episode in every way but one, and that one invisible difference is what turned it into a thing people would argue about for years. That split also feeds on how people fill in gaps. A fan who knows the show inside and out, who has watched everything else, naturally assumes they have watched this too, because why would there be a hole? So they reach into memory for the surrogate episode, find nothing solid, and the mind, hating that blank, quietly decides one of two things. Either it never existed, or, of course I saw it, it was years ago. Both answers feel certain, and neither is checked. The very completeness of a devoted fan's memory is what makes the missing piece so easy to paper over in the wrong direction. Years later, the argument has never fully settled. Ask online whether the surrogate story is real, and you will still find people insisting it was never made, sitting right next to people posting about watching it. Neither side is lying. Each is faithfully reporting a real memory, shaped by where they live and how they happen to meet the show. It is one of the cleanest examples there is of two honest groups holding opposite truths about the same simple fact. Not because anyone is careless, but because the fact itself was split in two the moment the network made its call. There is a tender thing buried under all the controversy too, and it is easy to lose. Strip away the fight over the subject and the story is about a woman doing something deeply kind for friends, agreeing to carry their child, and then having those friends torn away in an instant. It is a story about loss and impossible choices, wearing the skin of a comedy, and the cruel little irony is that a huge number of the show's own fans, the people who might have cared most, never got to see it on their own televisions, in their own homes, the way they saw everything else. The episode about a hard, private decision became a hard, private thing itself, passed around quietly instead of shared out loud. Think about the mother at the center of it, agreeing to carry a child for people she loved, full of good intentions, and then standing in the wreckage of a plan that fell apart through no fault of her own. It is one of the more human places the show ever went, a real ache under the usual noise, and almost none of the people who would have felt that ache the most were allowed to feel it the normal way, sitting on the couch on an ordinary night. They had to seek it out, or miss it, or imagine it, while the rest of the world simply watched. Two honest memories pointing in opposite directions, both built from real experience. That is the rare thing this episode created. Not a lie on either side, just a fact that genuinely came true in two different shapes depending on where a person happened to sit. Almost nothing else in the show can claim that, and the people who never saw it carry the strangest version of all. For them, the episode is pure rumor, a story about a story, a thing that exists only in other people's accounts. They cannot remember watching it, because they did not, and yet they cannot quite call it fake either, because too many trustworthy voices swear it is real. So it floats in a kind of half-existence in their minds, neither seen nor unseen, a permanent question mark hanging over an episode of a cartoon. Few shows ever manage to leave that exact gap in a person, the memory of a thing you were never allowed to have. The same finished half hour, sitting in two places at once. On one side of the ocean, a buried secret, whispered about, hunted down on a disc, denied by people, sure it was never real. On the other, just another night of television, watched and shrugged off and forgotten like any other. One episode, two memories, and no way to ever make them agree. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And here is the part that should unsettle you most. This was not the only episode the network decided to bury. There was another one, held back years earlier, for a completely different reason. Section 8, the episode before that one. On a night in late 2003, a brand new episode of a dead show quietly turned up on that same late-night block of grown-up cartoons, the one that had been keeping the series alive with reruns. New, not a repeat. An episode most people had never seen, appearing for the first time years after it had actually been made. There was no fanfare, no big return, just a held-back piece of the show slipping out into the dark hours, finally getting an airing. It had been denied for a long time. The episode is called When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, and like the surrogate story, it had been kept off the air on purpose. The reason this time was different. The plot leaned on religious humor, building jokes around faith and old stereotypes stereotypes in a way the network worried some viewers would find offensive. So rather than risk the backlash, the network simply held it. The episode was finished and ready, made early in the show's life, and then it sat unused while the people in charge decided it was safer not to air it at all. Holding a finished episode is a costly thing to do, which is part of what makes it notable. By the time a half hour is fully animated and scored, almost all the money has already been spent. The cheap moment to kill an episode is at the script stage, before anyone draws a frame. To pay for the whole thing and then refuse to air it is to eat that entire cost on purpose, just to avoid a fight. A network does not do that lightly. It does it only when the people in charge are genuinely afraid of how something will land. For a long time, that is exactly where it stayed. Made, but unseen. A complete episode with nowhere to go. The show itself got canceled in the meantime, which only buried the held episode deeper. A finished thing nobody outside the building had watched, attached to a series that no longer even produced new episodes, gathering dust with no clear future. It is one of the strangest spots a piece of a show can be in. Done, paid for, fully built, and yet invisible, as if it had never been made. By the time it finally crept out, the show around it had already been declared finished. So this was not a normal premiere on a healthy series. It was a stray piece of a canceled cartoon surfacing in the middle of the night on the very block that had turned the dead show into a quiet hit all over again. A new episode and an old rerun sat side by side on the same late-night schedule, indistinguishable to a sleepy viewer, one of them years old and one of them never aired before, with nothing on screen to tell them apart. Its eventual escape came through the side door rather than the front. Instead of premiering on the big network the way episodes are supposed to, it first reached the public on that late-night cartoon block, the small hours home for grown-up animation, on November 9, 2003. The big network finally aired it more than a year later, on December 10, 2004. So the proper official home of the show was the last place to show it, long after the late-night block had already let it out. The episode reached its audience backward, cable first and network last. The exact opposite of how it was meant to go. The network's worry, to be fair to it, was not hard to understand. Comedy that plays with faith and old stereotypes walks a narrow line, and what one viewer hears as a harmless joke, another hears as an insult. The people in charge had to weigh a single episode against the goodwill of a huge and varied audience, and they decided the safe move was to wait. Whether that caution was wise or timid is a fair thing to argue about. What matters here is simply that the caution existed, and that it was strong enough to keep a finished episode off the air for years. Walk through how it actually came out, and the picture is plainly tangled, made early then frozen. Frozen while the whole show died around it. Let loose first in the middle of the night on a block built for rerun. Then, much later, finally allowed onto the network it was made for. Add a home video release on top of all that, and there is no clean date to grab onto, no single tidy moment when the episode arrived. Its history is a knot, and a knot is the hardest possible thing for a memory to hold neatly. The result is that people remember this one in a dozen contradictory ways. Some are sure they first saw it late at night and were surprised it existed. Others are certain they caught it on the main network and never knew there was anything unusual about it. Others have a vague sense it was controversial but could not tell you why, or when, or where they encountered it. Every one of those memories is built from a real fragment, and every one is missing most of the story, because the story itself came out in scattered, mismatched pieces over years. All of this lands on memory the same way the rest of the show does. A person trying to place this episode has almost nothing solid to grab. Was it early or late? Was it on the main network or the late night block? Did it air at all, or only show up on a disc? Every one of those questions has a messy, split answer, and a messy answer is one the mind cannot file cleanly. So it does what it always does with a muddle. It picks whatever feels right, commits to it, and hands back a confident memory built on almost nothing. Underneath the tangle sits the point that matters. The surrogate episode was not a one-time accident. The network had a habit of this. Faced with an episode that might cause trouble, whether over a heated subject or over religious humor, the people in charge were willing to simply hold it to keep a finished piece of the show off the air for a year, or for several, or in the other case, forever. Burying episodes was not a freak event that happened once. It was a pattern, a thing the show lived with more than once, which means the version of the show that reached people was quietly missing parts from the start. Stack the two buried episodes together, and a quiet truth comes into focus. The version of the show that aired was never the version that was made. Pieces were held, delayed, hidden, or routed through side doors, which means the clean run, nobody questions, only ever existed on paper. In the order the episodes were finished, not in the order anyone actually saw them. The audience inherited a broadcast already full of small absences, and then built memories on top of those absences as if nothing were missing. You cannot keep faithful track of a thing that was handed to you in pieces. A show with holes cut into it cannot be remembered whole, no matter how carefully you watch. If episodes can be made and then hidden, delayed, slipped out through side doors, or kept off the air entirely, then the run any one person saw was never the complete thing. Stretches were missing, shuffled, or watched years out of place. People built their sense of the entire show out of a version that had gaps carved into it on purpose. purpose, and you cannot form an accurate memory of a thing you were only ever shown in part. That is the quiet damage these buried episodes do beyond their own odd stories. They prove that the broadcast people trusted was incomplete. The neat, ordered run that lives in a fan's head, one episode after another in a clean line, never actually existed for anyone. The real thing was patchy, interrupted, full of pieces that arrived late or sideways or not at all. And a patchy original, met out of order to begin with, is the perfect setup for a memory that feels solid and is riddled with holes. And because it was held so quietly, most people never learned the real story of how it came out. The delay, the cable first airing, the long wait for the network, all of it happened in the background, noticed by almost nobody at the time. So even fans who eventually saw the episode rarely know its strange path. They watched it like any other half hour and filed it like any other half hour with no idea it had spent years in the dark first. The hidden history stayed hidden, which let the episode quietly rejoin the pile as if it had always been there. There is one more wrinkle that makes this episode so easy to misplace. Because it dealt with touchy material, it became a thing people talked about more than they watched. Stories about it spread further than the episode itself ever did. So plenty of people carry a strong, confident memory of an episode they only ever heard described, their minds quietly turning secondhand talk into first-hand experience. The reputation outran the broadcast, and the reputation is what most people actually stored. Think of how ordinary it must have looked from the inside. To the people who made it, it was just another episode, written and drawn and finished on the same line as all the others. No different from the ones that aired without a second thought. Only at the very end, in a decision far from the drawing boards, did it become a special case. A piece of work can be completely normal in every way and still end up with a strange, lonely life, simply because of a single quiet call made by someone who never touched the art at all. Sit for a second with the image of that finished episode in the years it spent hidden, fully drawn, fully voiced, every joke in place, every scene complete, ready to play. And for a long stretch, nobody outside the building ever saw a frame of it, while the show it belonged to was declared dead and pushed into rerun. A whole episode, alive and finished, sitting in the dark, waiting for a quiet night years later when it could finally slip onto the air with almost no one noticing it had arrived. Multiply that one quiet call across a whole run, and you can see the real cost. Decisions made far from the screen, for reasons that had nothing to do with the work itself, quietly shaped which pieces of the show ever reached anyone. The version people remember was carved as much by caution in an office as by anything the writers ever put on the page. What the second buried episode demonstrates about the show's history is that the gaps were a pattern and not an accident. And a show watched with pieces missing, delayed, and shuffled can never be remembered as the clean and complete thing people are so certain they saw. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So why does any of this happen at all? Why can a whole crowd be so sure of so much that simply is not true? The answer is not really about a cartoon. It is about the way every memory you own is built. Section 9. Why your mind does this. Pull back from the show for a moment, and the real subject comes into view. Every case so far, the misheard words, the hidden face behind a voice, the joke filed in the wrong decade, the rewritten baby, the episodes that did and did not exist, all of them point at the same place, not at a cartoon, at the human mind. And one quiet fact about it that almost nobody is ever taught. Most of us walk around believing the opposite. We feel as though our memories are recordings, faithful little clips stored somewhere in the back of the head, waiting to be played back exactly as they happen. That belief feels obviously true, because remembering is effortless, and the results feel real. But decades of careful work on how memory actually behaves point the other way, towards something far stranger and far less reliable than a stored clip. The confidence is real. The accuracy is not promised with it. Remembering is not like fetching a saved thing off a shelf whole and unchanged. Each time you recall something, your mind builds it again from scratch, using a few strong scraps and a lot of fast guessing to fill the rest. You keep the gist, the feeling, a handful of vivid details, and you let most of the fine print go. Then, when you need the memory, you reassemble it on the spot, patching the missing parts with whatever seems to fit. The version you get back feels like a solid, original thing, but it was just rebuilt a second ago, a little differently than the last time you reached for it. When the mind hits a gap it cannot fill, it does not leave a blank or flash a warning light. It quietly invents something reasonable and slots it in. And it does this without ever telling you. Researchers have a name for that smooth, confident filling in of holes, and it goes on constantly. Under everything we remember, the invented piece does not feel invented. It feels exactly like the real parts around it, seamless and certain. So a memory can be half true and half made up, and from the inside there is no way to feel the line between them. You can feel this happen if you watch for it. Try to recall a specific ordinary morning from a few years ago, and notice how much of it you are quietly building rather than retrieving. You assume you ate breakfast, so you place breakfast there. You know where you usually sat, so you sit yourself there. Most of the scene is reasonable guesswork dressed up as memory, and all of it feels equally solid. The few real details and the many invented ones arrive wearing the same face, and you have no way to tell which is which from the inside. The mind is also surprised surprisingly bad at tracking where a memory even came from. You might hold a clear picture in your head and have no idea whether you saw it, read it, dreamed it, or simply heard someone describe it once. A thing a friend told you can settle in feeling like a thing you witnessed with your own eyes. A scene you only imagined can harden into a scene you are sure you watched. So people end up certain they saw an episode they only heard about, or sure they remember a moment that was really just described to them years ago because the mind quietly lost the little tag that said where the memory began. That is why witnesses in a courtroom, trying their honest best, so often get key things wrong. A person can be completely sincere, completely sure, and still misremember a face, a color, the order of events, because somewhere along the way, a detail they only heard about got folded into what they think they saw. Sincerity is not accuracy. A confident witness and a correct witness are not the same thing, and the gap between them is not lying. It is just the ordinary way the mind blends what it saw with what it was told until the scene disappears. On top of all that, expectation steers the whole process from underneath. Your mind fills its gaps with whatever matches what you already believe, not with whatever happens to be true. Believe a show is rude, and a fuzzy sound becomes a curse. Believe a baby was always sweet, and the dark early version gets painted over without a fight. The brain reaches for the answer that fits the story it already holds, because that answer feels right, and feeling right is the only test the mind ever truly runs. Truth does not get a vote. Fit does. Then comes the part that turns a private slip into a shared one. We talk to each other, we compare memories, repeat them, pass them around, and every retelling nudges the memory a little, often toward whatever the group already agrees on. A wrong detail, said with confidence and heard by others, starts to spread. Soon a whole crowd is reinforcing the same mistake, each person quietly treating everyone else's certainty as proof. The error stops being one person's and becomes the group's, polished and strengthened a little more every time it is shared. The retelling does not even need a crowd to do its work. Tell a story about yourself enough times, and your own repetitions start to reshape it. Each version smooths a rough edge, sharpens a punchline, tidies the order of events, until the polished tale you tell at parties has quietly drifted from whatever actually happened. You are not lying when you tell it. You are remembering your last telling more than the original event, copying a copy of a copy, each pass a little further from the truth and a little more sure of itself. Consider how this plays out with the small things of an ordinary life, far away from any cartoon. People argue for years about the exact words a relative once said. They misremember the color of a childhood bedroom, the layout of a house they lived in, the year a big family event happened. Whole families carry stories that did not happen the way everyone swears they did, with each person sure of their version. Each version a little different, all of them honestly believe. The cartoon is not special. It is just louder, watched by more people, easier to check, which is why the same slips that hide inside private lives suddenly become visible here. All of these forces, the filling in, the lost sources, the steering, the drift, would be hard to prove if they only ever showed up in private. The trouble is that one person's faulty memory is almost impossible to check, since there is rarely a clean record of an ordinary life to hold it against. Shared icons solve that problem. A logo or a famous character has one correct version anyone can pull up and confirm, which finally gives a fixed answer to measure people's memories against. And when researchers did exactly that, the results were striking. In a study from 2022, researchers set out to test this directly with famous images, the logos and characters everyone thinks they know by heart. They showed people different versions of well-known icons and asked which was the real one. Over and over, large numbers of people chose the same wrong version and chose it with real confidence, certain they had it right. The mistakes were not random and scattered, they clustered. Whole crowds leaned the same wrong way about the same image, as if they had all quietly agreed in advance on a version that never existed. The strangest part of that study came when people were asked to draw certain characters from memory. About half of them drew the same feature wrong, in the same way, with nothing in front of them to copy, not picking a wrong picture out of a lineup, where the choices on the screen might nudge them, but reaching into their own memory and pulling out the identical mistake, then putting it down on paper. The error was not sitting on a screen tricking them. It was already inside them, fully formed, waiting. That is the whole strange effect in one quiet experiment. A shared mistake carried internally, drawn out by strangers who never compared notes and matched anyway. Sit with that image for a moment. A room full of strangers, each handed a pencil and asked to draw a character they have known since childhood. They have never met. They share nothing except having grown up in the same world of cartoons and logos. And one after another, without conferring, without copying, they put the same wrong detail down on the page, a feature that was never there, pulled from a shared memory none of them ever actually saw. It is quietly eerie. A whole crowd reaching inward and drawing out the identical mistake, proof that the error was never about one careless person. It was waiting inside all of them at once. Strange as it sounds, a confident wrong memory and an accurate one are made of the same stuff. Both are rebuilt on the spot. Both feel equally true from the inside. The only difference is whether the guesses the mind filled in happen to match what really occurred, and the mind itself cannot tell the two apart. That is why being certain proves so little. Certainty is only how a finished memory feels, not a measure of whether it is right. None of this means anyone is foolish. It means memory was never built to be a perfect record in the first place. It was built to be useful, fast, and good enough to hold the rough shape of things so you can get through your day, not to keep a flawless archive you could check later. The filling in, the lost sources, the steering by expectation, the drift through retelling, these are not flaws that break an otherwise good system. They are how the system has always worked, in every mind, about everything. A cartoon simply happens to be a place where enough people made the same mistakes loudly enough that the process can finally be caught in the act. Once you really take that in, the fans arguing about a cartoon stop looking strange and start looking ordinary. They are not a special breed of careless viewer. They are simply running the same memory that everyone runs, on a subject that happens to be easy to check. Point the same process at your own past, your own childhood, your own certainties, and it behaves no differently. The only reason the cartoon mistakes stand out is that someone can finally hold them up against the truth. Most of our private false memories never get that test, so we go on trusting them for life. What the science of memory demonstrates about all of this is that the mind is not a keeper of records but a teller of stories, rebuilding the past fresh every single time it is asked, and never once warning you that the version it just handed back was built in part out of guesses. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. 9 cases now sit on the table. Put them together and a single pattern appears, one that says something about this show and something far larger about you. Section 10, the pattern behind all of them. Somewhere right now, the show is starting up. The little piano kicks in, the cheerful old style swells, the family trades their lines about values and television, and the baby caps it off before everyone shouts the title. It is playing in a living room where someone has half drifted off on the couch and on a phone propped against a pillow, and in the background of a room where nobody is really watching at all. The same opening that has run since the very beginning, rolling out one more time, soaking into people who could not tell you a single true thing about where it came from. Nobody in those rooms is studying it. The song is wallpaper now, a sound that means the show is on, worn so smooth by repetition that the words have stopped registering as words at all. And that is exactly the state in which a memory goes soft. A thing you actively pay attention to, you might get right. A thing that simply washes over you 1,000 times. While you doze or scroll or talk over it, you absorb as a vague shape, a feeling, a guess. The most familiar sound in the whole show is also the least truly heard, which is why so many people carry it wrong. Lay the 9 cases side by side and they stop being separate oddities. A misheard pair of words, a hidden truth behind a familiar voice, a joke shoved back in time by almost a decade, a villain rewritten into a sweetheart, episodes that lived and did not live at the same time. Each one looked like its own little mystery. Together they are one mystery wearing different costumes, and they all grow from the same root. What makes this show such a clean example is not that its fans are unusual, it is that the show gave memory every possible chance to go wrong. A long life, so there is a great deal to misremember. A loud reputation, so expectation has plenty to push again. A broken broadcast history, so the timeline is a maze. A casual, half-watched, late-night kind of fame, so attention was always low. Pour all of those together and you get something close to a laboratory for false memory, a place where the ordinary slips of the mind get amplified until they are impossible to miss. That root is the strange life of the show itself. A cartoon that launched enormous, then collapsed, then died, then clawed its way back from the grave through reruns and discs instead of living weekend to week the way shows are meant to. Almost nobody met it in order. People found it in the small hours, in stacked weekend marathons, in loose clips with no dates attached. Years after the fact, half asleep, a show absorbed that way does not arrive as a clean, ordered story. It arrives as a heap of fragments, and the mind, doing the only thing it knows how to do, builds those fragments into something smooth and confident and largely invented. None of it required anyone to be gullible or careless. The misheard lyric fools sharp, attentive people. The hidden voice fooled lifelong fans who had heard it 10,000 times. The misdated joke trips up the very people who love the show enough to quote it from memory. These are not the mistakes of people who were not paying attention. They are the mistakes of people doing exactly what attention does, taking in a flood of impressions and keeping the gist while the details quietly slip away. The errors are built into how watching works, not a failure of the people watching. Every case is just that process showing its work. The words got misheard because the ear guesses and the show's loud reputation tilted the guess. The voice fooled people because a cartoon hides the person making it and the mind paints in a face that was never there. The joke landed in the wrong decade because the feeling of a thing outlives the date of it, and a broken timeline made the true date impossible to find. The baby got rewritten because the drawing stayed frozen while the character moved, and memory trusts the drawing. The episode split the room because a show full of buried and shuffled pieces can never be held whole. Different doors, all opening into the same house. Step back even further and the cases start to rhyme with one another. A sound, a face, a date, a personality. An entire episode, 5 completely different kinds of thing, all bent by by the same handful of forces. That is the tell that something deep is going on. When wildly different details fail in the same way, the problem is not in the details. It is in the thing doing the remembering. The show is just the surface where the pattern became visible, the spot where enough people slipped in the same direction at once for anyone to notice the slope at all. And the deepest turn is the one that points away from the cartoon entirely. None of this is really a quirk of one show or one fan base. The same machinery is running inside you all the time about everything you have ever loved. Your favorite movie, the songs of your childhood, the way a room in an old house was laid out, the exact words someone said to you years ago. You are rebuilding all of it the same way these fans rebuilt this show, keeping the feeling, losing the fact, filling the gaps with confident guesses, and never feeling the difference. The cartoon is just a mirror held at the right angle, finally letting you see the trick your own mind never stops performing. It can feel unsettling at first, the idea that your own certainties are not as solid as they seem. We lean on memory for almost everything, our sense of the past, of other people, of who we are. To be told that it quietly rewrites itself can sound like being told the floor is not firm, but the floor holds well enough for daily life, which is all it was ever meant to do. The point is not to stop trusting your memory. The point is to hold it a little more loosely, with some humor, knowing it is a storyteller and not a witness. There is something almost gentle in that once the surprise wears off. The mistakes are not a sign that people watched carelessly or cared too little. They are the opposite. The errors gather thickest around the things people watched the most, loved the most, return to again and again on 1,000 ordinary nights. Nobody misremembers what they ignored. People misremember what they held close, because holding something close means handling it over and over, and every time you pick a memory up, you set it back down a little chain. The wrong memories are worn spots, rubbed soft by affection. None of this should make anyone love the show, or their own memories, any less. If anything, it is a reason to hold both more tenderly. The fans are not victims of a trick played on them. They are people who let a silly cartoon into the soft, personal part of the mind, where the things we cherish get stored and reshaped and made our own. That is what it looks like when something matters to you. It stops being a fixed object out in the world and becomes a living thing inside you, changing a little every time you visit it. So the next time you are sure, dead sure, about some small detail of a thing you have known for years, sit with that certainty for a second instead of trusting it. The feeling of being right is not proof of being right. It is just the smooth surface the mind lays over a story it quietly rebuilt without asking your permission. The people arguing about a baby's lullaby words, or a robot's leg, or a little man's missing eyeglass are not strangers to you. They are showing you, out loud, the exact thing your own quiet mind is doing with everything you think you remember. Think about everything you would swear you remember perfectly. The face of someone you love, the home you grew up in, a song that owned a whole summer, a line from a movie you have seen 20 times. Every one of those is being quietly rebuilt each time you reach for it, polished and patched and nudged toward what feels right, exactly like a misheard cartoon lyric. You are not the exception to any of this. Nobody is. The only real difference between you and the fans arguing online is that their mistakes happen to be checkable, and almost all of yours never will be. None of us gets to stand outside our own memory and check it against the truth. We are stuck inside it, trusting the only account we have, the one the mind keeps quietly editing without permission. The fans are not failing at something the rest of us are passing. They are simply doing it in the one place where the answer key happens to be public, and maybe that is the kindest way to hold all of it. Not as proof that memory is broken, but as proof that being human means living inside a story you are always quietly rewriting, about the people and the songs and the silly cartoons you love. The wrongness is not a failure. It is the cost of caring about anything long enough for it to soften and blur and become yours. The fans defending a curse that was never sung are simply loving the show the only way any of us can love anything, in a memory that keeps gently changing the thing it holds. So let the fans keep arguing. Let them swear the baby always sang a curse, insist the neighbor never changed, place an old joke in years it never lived, deny an episode that is sitting on a shelf somewhere right now. Every one of those arguments is a small monument to how much they watched and how much it stayed with them. A show nobody cared about would produce no false memories at all, because nobody would bother to remember it wrong. The mistakes are the fingerprints of attention, left all over a cartoon that turned out to matter far more than it ever pretended to. And there is a quiet comfort in that, if you want one. It means the things you loved are not gone just because your memory of them has drifted. They are still alive in you, warm and a little blurred, reshaped by every year you carried them. A perfectly accurate memory would be a cold thing, a file in a drawer. A memory that softens and bends and grows is a living one, proof that the thing got inside you and stayed. The fans did not lose the show to bad memory. They turned it into something personal, which is the only thing memory has ever really known how to do. The song is still going, wherever it is playing tonight. The family is still singing about laughing and crying, and somewhere a tired person is half hearing it. Sure, they know every word, getting the last two wrong without ever knowing it, drifting off while a show they have watched 100 times rebuilds itself one more time inside a mind that was never going to keep it straight. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.